So many jobs I've been on have started with just a tiny piece of information, and that's exploded into this huge, complicated job, often taking you across entire continents. It's just amazing how in the world of intelligence that can happen. You know, if there's a secret project, often the piece of news that might leak out might be very tiny. Somebody's turned up somewhere where they aren't, or there's a flight that doesn't make sense. And that then suddenly leads into this whole great big adventure. And that's the bit that films like Mission Impossible get right. The bits that Mission Impossible, James Bond and all the others get wrong is all the action, the fast driving, the shooting. The whole idea as a spy is you're in, you're out, nobody even knows you were there. So if you're having to do J turns in a sports car or, you know, put a silencer on the end of your, you know, Beretta, then something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. I joined in a very unusual way, in that I was in my last year at Oxford, and that was the way you were picked up in those days for MI5 and MI6. And a tutor just said to me one sunny afternoon when he got bored listening to me reading my essays, "What are you doing when you go down from Oxford, Harry?" And I said, being typical 20-year-old, I was like, "Oh, I don't know." And he said, "Have you ever thought of working for your country in certain ways?" You know, he had a terrible twitch. Again, I didn't really know what he meant. And I said, "Yeah, sure." And the next thing I know, I got a brown envelope in the pigeonhole at the college, inviting me up to an interview, which turned out to be an interview with MI6. And the basic difference between MI5 and MI6 is that MI5, by and large, deals with intelligence and security matters within the United Kingdom. So they're like the secret police. Whereas MI6 is responsible for gathering intelligence all over the rest of the world. So we're the people who run agents, you know, in Iran and Russia and China and all the really sort of tasty places. And that's the service which is supposedly represented in the James Bond films. In the UK, there's a long interview process, and then very few people get selected. But if you get through onto the training course, then there's a good chance you will finish. Because the idea is, it was part of the sort of ethos of the whole thing. Because you want all your spies to be as different as possible, they shouldn't all come out of the same mold. The idea is you take people with different ranges of skills and then you make them spies. They don't all fit the same mold. Whereas I was talking to Mike Baker of the CIA about this, and he, like me, is a trainer. They get rid of about 50% of the people on their courses. And it's much more quasi-military. You can always, you know, if you meet a CIA officer, they do tend to be quite similar. I don't know whether it's the haircuts, but you get this feeling, you know, that you're talking to a CIA officer. Whereas the whole idea with the British services is that you've got to be much more clever, that nobody should be able to go into a room and say, "Oh, that's the British spy." In fact, quite a lot of the fun comes in making people think they know who the British spy is. And so the training is very supportive. It's, you know, you would imagine if you watched the James Bond films, for instance, that the training is, all about handling guns and explosives and karate and things like that. It's much more supportive than that. They're not looking to fail you. They're looking to take your strengths and improve them. So people imagine that spying is a very dangerous occupation. It's not. In the 115 years of the existence of MI6, the number of MI6 officers that have been killed in operations is 0. That's not the James Bond image. And this is not because MI6 officers are particularly more skilled than others. It's because the way that all intelligence services work is, let's say that tomorrow you were told there's this Iranian nuclear plant. We think they're producing a nuclear bomb for Iran. We need to get find out what they're doing. Doesn't matter how good your Farsi is or how good your disguises are, you're not going to walk in there. But what you might be able to do is find an Iranian scientist who needs something, needs some help, has some aspect to his character which you can exploit, and they will tell you what's going on in there. So what spies do is they run agents. All people who are members of things like MI6, CIA, FSB, etc., we're officers. Our job is to run agents. We recruit them, we train them, we run them. The agent runs the risk. So when the job goes belly up, I'm on the first plane back to London, but the agent gets left behind to the job. So what you're looking for in the interview process is you're not looking for a particular kind of person, but I think having sort of done this, you sit there and you say, this person, if I sent them abroad to do this job, is another person going to trust this officer with their life? Because that's what you're essentially asking them to do. And often not just their life, but their family's lives. The agents you run are closer than some of your best friends, because you not only see them when you're with them, but they are obviously put under surveillance at other times. Their premises, maybe you know so much about them. There have been psychological studies of them, and so you know everything about them. You know about their family, about their kids. If you get picked up as an agent in Zimbabwe, for instance, at the time that was under a particularly murderous regime, then they will come, they will pick you up. They will take you away, and not just you, they'll take away your wife and your kids, and they will come with the chainsaws, and they will chop them to little pieces in front. You've lost an agent under those circumstances. It's the guilt for what you're responsible for that has ended more careers that I've known than anybody, any bullet or knife in a back alley or anything like that. And again, it's that mental cost that people don't see on officers who've been in the job for a long time.
Hi, welcome to Deep.
This channel goes a level deeper.
Deep is a brand new YouTube channel that is dedicated to the amazing experiences of incredible individuals.
We basically try and answer the questions that you always want the answer to, but you don't feel like you can ask.
Myself and the team are responsible for a lot of the factual content that you might have seen on YouTube. Minutes with, The Gap, Agree to Disagree, among others. And we set up this new studio and this new channel to go a level deeper.
We will be uploading a new video every single week.
There'll be a wide range of stories, so please hit the subscribe bell.
Please let us know in the comments if there's anything you want us to cover, any stories that you've been interested in, any questions you wanted to ask.
We hope you enjoy. Now back to our story.
I was recruited in the early 1980s. So the Cold War was at its height. The Soviet Union was the big baddie. It was all about nipping behind the Berlin Wall. And that classic Le Carré spying was what I started in. And it's been fascinating that I started off in a world with all those classic spy tricks like dead letterboxes and brush contacts. A dead letterbox is, in America, it's called a dead drop. But the British call it a dead letterbox. And this is when you choose a location where you can leave a message. And the idea will be that the agent who's doing all the hard work and running the risks will come along at a later time and pick up the message. So, for instance, it could be a rock at the base of a particular tree that's coloured slightly different to the other rocks. Something that you can just, as you're walking around, just drop out of your pocket onto the ground. Because even if surveillance behind you, as long as you choose your route carefully, they won't see you. Just take this thing out and drop it, right? And in this hollow rock will be the message containing the instructions to the agent. 3 days later, your agent comes along. He's looking for that coloured rock, and he finds it, picks it up, takes it home, or opens it there and gets a message. That's a dead letterbox. A brush contact is that thing you may have seen in lots and lots of spy films where one person approaches another. They've both got identical briefcases or carrier bags or whatever it is, and one puts one down and then picks the other guys up and walks on. So they've effectively swapped briefcases. And those were real techniques and were really used. But is a surveillance team following you in? And this is why we spend a lot of time in all intelligence services training in counter-surveillance, the art of knowing whether you are being watched. And oddly enough, you would think that knowing you're being watched is a terrible time for a spy. If you actually spot the surveillance team and think, "Oh, right, they're on me today," you'd think, "Oh, yeah, now I'm in trouble." No, it's the best time in the world to be a spy is when you've got a surveillance team behind you and you've spotted them, because now you can do nothing. I've obviously worked both sides of the fence because I work for the NIS, so I've been on surveillance, and it's very labour intensive. It's not you follow people down the road. You basically contain them in this box of people and vehicles, and you control their movements like that with people crisscrossing the box and getting sight. It just requires so much coordination, so much effort. You're always running or driving at high speed, etc., etc. Well, I have to say, as the spy in the middle of that, you think, great. What shall I do? I'll take them to this crowded shopping centre because that's going to make them work really hard. I'm going to go out into the country because I know that means they can't be close to me and they're going to have to take even wider distances. So again, the reality of spying is often different from the way you'd expect. A lot of the things that people think that spies would think are bad are actually quite good for us, and we enjoy much more. They brought in these little boxes on which you would type your message for the agent, and the agent had a similar little box about the size of a cigarette packet. And you could actually be on the other side of a square, never mind a street. And as you both agree to be there at a certain time, as you're walking through the square, you press a button on this box in your pocket. It burst transmits your secret instructions to your agent. His little box warbles in his pocket and he knows that he's picked up instructions. He can go home, look at the box there. And it began to get even more complicated than that because they decided to start using base stations because they thought rather than having both the officer and the agent in the same place at the same time, we need a delay, just as used to happen with the old dead letterboxes. So they introduced it so that you would have a base station, for instance, hidden in a rock in a park, something that nobody's going to pick up and run home with. You would go along, press your little button, your instructions to your agent would be transmitted to the base station hidden in the rock. You would then go home, taking your surveillance team with you. Up to a couple of weeks later, the agent can come along, not even go to the rock, just walk past the area, just press the button in his little box in his pocket, and the message would be transmitted from the rock to him. So it began to get that complicated. And there was a famous case in about 2006 when the MI6 station in Moscow was using one of these base stations. And unfortunately, the Russians turned one of the agents. He explained how he was being contacted. And they worked out from his device and various other technical tricks where the base station was. They then put the base station, which was in this rock in this Russian park, under surveillance. Now, standing instructions are, if there's a problem, you just abandon everything, right? Unfortunately, standing instructions don't always get obeyed. And the Russians filmed, I think it was 3 different MI6 officers coming up and kicking the rock and trying to see why it wasn't working. And subsequently, the Russians expelled, I think, the entire Moscow MI6 station because once you've got one officer, you can make links to others and so on and so forth. So it wasn't quite the perfect method that everybody thought it was. You know, the old methods sound clumsy and all these microelectronic ways sound very exciting, don't they? And very secure. No. And it's since been learnt that quite often things like burst transmissions, for instance, can be intercepted. So oddly enough, I'm now so old that I saw it all start with sort of the old Le Carré Moscow rules since. I've seen it go through the golden electronic age, and we're now, in many cases, coming back to the old ways of doing things with paper and so forth because you can trust it. I really like the modern Mission Impossible films with Tom Cruise. They have this problem, a building they've got to break into, an individual they've got to get hold of. And they just sit down and think, what can we do? What's the most imaginative way that we can do this? That's exactly how a real spy mission works. You have this target. The government sets the targets. They say, we want to know about Iranian weapons. We want to know about Chinese spying, whatever it is. From my very first days, what I really liked as a young officer was that you would sit down in operational planning, and the rule was you could say anything you wanted. It didn't matter how stupid the idea was. The idea was to do something that the enemy wasn't expecting and to do something new. And often when you come to a job fresh, that's when you have your best ideas because you don't know how it's normally done. And that's the bit that films like Mission Impossible get right. The bits that Mission Impossible, James Bond and all the others get wrong is all the action, the fast driving, the shooting. The whole idea as a spy is you're in, you're out. Nobody even knows you were there. So if you're having to do J turns in a sports car or, put a silencer on the end of your, Beretta, then something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. So many jobs I've been on have started with just a tiny piece of information, and that's exploded into this huge, complicated job, often taking you across entire continents. It's just amazing how in the world of intelligence that can happen. If there's a secret project, often the piece of news that might leak out might be very tiny. Somebody's turned up somewhere where they aren't, or there's a flight that doesn't make sense. And that then suddenly leads into this whole great big adventure. And that's probably one of the best things about espionage as a profession. The difference between the films and the reality is this, that, as I said, if you're a spy, you want to get in and out without anybody even knowing you were there. And so everything about you should appear to be innocent. If I've got a radio in my shoe and they find it, I'm not talking my way out of it very easily. Suppose, for instance, I have to go and photograph the Iranian secret base we were talking about, right? There are several ways I can do it. I could take a spy camera hidden in a shirt button or something and try and take footage of it. But if that spy camera gets found, I'm a spy, right? Yeah. Or I could take something that you can get commercially off Amazon, something that's hidden in your hat or a piece of jewelry, or so, and I could take my film of the security arrangements at the front gate of the Iranian spy base like that. That's fine. If you get caught with it, you could try some kind of defense like, I'm a private investigator and one of these scientists is having an affair and I've been hired by the way. You might get away with it. Because it's commercially available, it doesn't immediately scream spy. And most intelligence services, whenever they can, won't build their own spy kit. They'll use commercially available stuff. And That has changed a lot in the past 40 years, trust me. But the best way to do it, and the first way a spy will try and do it, is turn up outside the secret Iranian facility, and trust me, this does happen, with a big camera and take as many photographs as you like. Because if you get caught, you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm here on holiday. I just thought, wow, what is this? You got all these soldiers and everything, and I just thought, wow, this is great. This is, and I just took a lot of photographs. I'm really sorry, and that's why I did it with this camera, with this huge telephoto lens that you could easily see from your patrol towers, and you'd be amazed at the number of times you get away with it. Spies have to appear to be ordinary people, and gadgets mean you're not. So when gadgets are used, what generally happens is you'll use some form of quartermaster. So you will go in under your cover just as an ordinary person with your ordinary stuff. At some point, you'll have a meeting, perhaps a brush contact with the quartermaster. He will then pass you the laser gun or whatever it is you're going to use. You then use said equipment, and then you give it back. So the amount of time you have that gadget is as little as possible. And you can see this from the Salisbury poisoning, in which Skripal was poisoned with polonium. We've now got footage of the 2 FSB officers who came in and went around Salisbury, supposedly as tourists. The third guy was the equipment officer. He brought in the poison. He then gave it to them once they were in Salisbury and they carried it out. They then gave it back to him, and it was his job to dispose of it. So that's the way that gadgets work. Spies hate gadgets. The best thing is if you can take ordinary items that anybody might be carrying and use them to spy purposes. And again, some of these are tricks that we're not allowed to give away because they work very, very well. But the crisp one, for instance, suppose you want to know if somebody's been in your hotel room while you're out or entered your premises or whatever. If you take a crisp and place it under a rug or under the doormat, you know your crisp. If somebody treads on that rug and they don't notice, which is quite likely, the crisp gets broken. When you come in and lift the rug, you know they've been there. But if you're ever caught with your bag of crisps, you're just an ordinary person. And that's the principle. Being a spy is about using your imagination. It's using your imagination to design operations. It's using your imagination to work out how to appeal to that person to spy for you. And it's using your imagination to say, right, this is where I'm going to be working. These are the possible threats I have. What's the kind of stuff I can carry that anybody might carry that I can use to defend myself? Spies don't kill spies is the basic rule. They will kill agents and they will kill defectors or traitors. But in general, you don't have, FSB officers killing CIA officers killing Chinese intelligence. It's not that kind of spy war. And again, that's where James Bond and so forth gets it wrong. We're playing for very high stakes, but it's the agents that we're playing for. We're not fighting each other directly, but thousands, literally thousands of agents have died, just say in the British service alone. So they're the people who have paid the price. And that's in some ways the bit that scares me more, the fact that for the rest of your life, if you have an agent and you say to him, I need you to go into that Iranian nuclear facility and get those photographs of the new piece of equipment, he's going to do it. If he gets caught, it's a blindfold, last cigarette, firing squad, whatever it is, and that's if they don't torture him. You prepared them, you put them at the risk, and if they die or they're imprisoned for 20 years, that's your fault. And that's the bit that, as I say, ends careers. Some people will just go, I can't take it anymore, and go. You're dealing with people's life. You're dealing with things that really matter. If you get it wrong, not only might agents die, but if a terrorist attack is successful, that's down to you. If you were working on that job and you missed the clues, these are huge stakes that you're playing for. So although you might not get shot, you bear that weight on your shoulders, and that's a terrible thing. The core of NIS work, NIS work, was surveillance. That's why I've become so experienced in surveillance. There was always more work than the NIS could handle. You got a lot of suspects who smuggle weapons or drugs, and you can pick up lots of mules at ports and airports, right? But they will just hire more and the circle goes on. The people you really want to get are at the top. And you often know who they are. They're often not, because they've got so much damn money. They can't get rid of it all. They've got like gold-plated Land Rovers and God knows what. That's how you know who the successful ones are. So you need to get to them. You need to put them under surveillance, find out what they're doing, who they're talking to, map out their organization, bug them, place hidden microphones, hidden video cameras, work out who they're dealing with abroad. So the surveillance often would carry on abroad. So it's just like intelligence work. And then once you've built up a picture of their organization and you know when the next big delivery is coming in from Colombia or whatever, that's when you hit the organization. Now, a lot of that is surveillance work. And that was the thing that I particularly specialized in. But also there was an undercover element as well that sometimes, not all the time, you could put an officer into that organization. And the way you would do that is a lot of these syndicates are really tight. They often are derived amongst people who've met in prison or brought up in the same city, maybe sometimes even the same housing estate. The guys at the top all know each other. That's how they're able to operate. You can't break into that bond of trust. So I can't come in as Joe Smith, make friends with one of them and be taken. It's not like the movies where Brad Pitt will just turn up, have a tattoo put on his neck and be accepted as a member of the gang, right? However, what we tended to find with that kind of operation is that these guys would make more money than they could dream of, but they didn't know what to do with it. So what you could do is I could come along as a bent city banker who dealt in dirty funds, could come along and have a meeting with them at a nice posh office in London and say, I can deal with your money for you. I get rid of money for other people. And of course, they have a little taster just to see if you're genuine. And then if you're actually making the money or cleaning the money for them, then they trust you. Then you can get into the syndicate that way. And that's your way in. I remember at one stage setting up a roadblock for a suspect, and he was a convicted murderer. And the information we had from the people inside the organization was that he would be armed. Now, the idea was he would be taken down at a roadblock, and we would have armed police would take him out. The armed police, we get told, as we'd actually closed off an entire dual carriageway. This was like 2:00 in the morning. We get told the armed police aren't coming because they've been called to another more important job. Lord knows what the more important job was. We pulled the cars across the road, trying to block it as much as possible, but we had to keep drivers in the cars because we thought he might go round it and we'll get in a car chase situation. And we said, if he stops, our only hope is get to him before he gets out the car and starts shooting. In that moment, you just think, how the hell did I end up here doing this? Anyway, long story short, he pulled up short of the roadblock. It turned out in his interview afterwards, he thought there'd been a major road accident. That's why he stopped. He didn't get involved in it. So we charged the car and he got out the car, and I just never run so hard in my life, because you just think he mustn't pull a weapon. And we just piled on top of him. He wasn't armed. He decided at the last moment not to take the weapon with him. But you can imagine that is one of the most scared I've been, because you really thought that might be the last minute. And you might think that, okay, just run a bit slower. Let the other guys get there first, just in case he's pulling out an Uzi or something. But no, because the guys next to you are your brothers. You work with them every day, and you've worked on this case for 6 months. So there's no way you're letting them get there faster than you. So we were all running as fast as we bloody well could. I had a moment of clarity, as they call it in the job, where I was on an OP, an observation point, which was on the 20th floor of a block of flats in South London. And we were keeping watch on a builder's yard where we knew they were building concealments into vehicles for a big drug importation that was coming up. And you could only go in at night time. So it was like 24-hour shifts. And so we had plastic bottles and cling film for certain bodily functions. And it was, and I just thought in about week 2, I think I've done this now. I've had the car chases, the fist fights. I've done all that stuff, done all the intelligence. Maybe it's time to do something else. I'm getting a bit old. The kids are growing up, etc., etc. Being a spy is like learning a foreign language in some ways. It opens up this whole new vista. You understand things you didn't understand before. I made a decision when I was 20, and I'm here talking to you today because that one decision dominated my life, and the things I've had to do and the people that I've had to meet and deal with and so on and so forth. And is it all worth it at the end of the day? I don't know. I really don't. There's been a lot of activity. A lot of people have been involved. I don't want to say hurt, but it's affected a lot of lives. You've got to have a particular mind for it, and you're going to have to put up with the fact that this is for life. I've done things I won't be able to talk about to anybody for my whole life. Sits in there, and I know it. People, things that have happened, never ever be able to talk about it. And it is a weight, and it will affect you.